So to begin with, we're just going to create some basic text, as you can see on my screen here. And to do this, we're going to use the command panel on the right-hand side of our screen. So we're going to go to the Create tab. We're going to go to the Shapes tab, or the Shapes submenu. And then we're going to go to the Text tool here. And when the text tool is blue, that means it's active, and we can right-click on our scene to turn that off. But the text tool gives us access to all of these parameters, so we're able to change the font that we're using as well as the size, and it even has some kerning and leading things which we're not going to be using because we're going to just be making each object separately in our scene. Okay, so let's get started. Okay, so to begin with here, we're just going to start drawing the shapes for our logo. So let's jump into the top view, which is the view in the upper left-hand corner here. Just left-click in the view and it should get a yellow border around it. And then we'll press Alt-W to maximize that view. Now in this view, we're simply going to start by going to the Create tab in our command panel. And my command panel is 2 columns wide as opposed to 1. And I accomplish that by simply selecting or left-clicking on the border of the viewport and just moving my mouse to the left a little bit. And this just gives us a little bit more real estate, which we probably won't use much during this class, but you'll see that mine is generally set up this way. So to not have you guys confused, just wanted to show you how I did that. So now we're going to click on the text icon here, and that's going to open up some parameters for us to work with. And we're going to start by going into the text dialog and just replacing the text that's in there with the letter I. And we're going to change the font from Arial to Arial Black, or whichever yours is set to. We're going to change it to Arial Black. And then we're just going to simply left click in the upper left hand quadrant here to give us our I. Now once we're done using any tool in 3D Studio Max, you'll notice that this text button is still highlighted, which means the tool is still active. So if I click anywhere else in the screen, it's going to add another letter. So to deactivate any tool, when we're done with it, we simply right click in the viewport. So that's a right mouse button click in the viewport, deactivates the tool, and now we're ready to move on to the next letter. So next we need the heart, so we're going to go back to our text tool, and inside of the parameters section we're going to change our font to Webdings. Okay, so we're going to scroll all the way down here towards the bottom and select Webdings, and we're going to simply put a capital Y in to the text field and then just left click on our scene. Now as you can see, my heart is quite a bit bigger than my eye, so I'm going to grab this box by just simply left clicking on the box that's in between the 2 arrows here, and I'm going to just position my heart so that it's on top of the eye like this. And then I'm going to go to my Modify panel, which is the second tab in the command panel here, and I'm just going to change the size of the heart. I can simply move this around a little bit more, so that I can reposition it, and maybe I can pull it down a little bit more. And we don't need it to be exact, we're just going for a visual lineup here. So we're just going to adjust this a little bit by a little bit until we get it to where we want. That looks pretty good. And then I'm just going to move this back over using the Y constraint by simply left clicking on the Y, or I'm sorry, the X constraint, by simply left clicking on the X arrow and moving that over so that it's not on top of the I anymore. Now for the third letter, we're simply going to come back over to the area underneath the I, and I can navigate around by simply using the middle mouse button on my mouse to pan around the scene. So that's fairly handy to do. The middle mouse button also allows us to zoom in and zoom out of our active viewport. So again, that's middle mouse button to pan around the scene, and then scroll wheel middle mouse button to zoom in and out. So now we can come back to our Create tab and click on Text again, and we're going to change this to 3, and we're going to change this back to Arial, or Arial Black, and we're going to go ahead and left click on our scene, and you'll see that it adds the 3, and once again I'm going to right click to get out of the text tool. Now the parameters all go away, and if you'll notice, like our 3 is way shorter than our I now, so we're going to need to adjust that. And in order to adjust that, we're going to again go into the Modify panel, and we're just going to assign this to 100, which is the default value when you start up a new project in Max. It's also the value that's assigned to the I. You can see that that's already assigned to 100. Once I've got the 3 in my scene and it's the right scale, I'll simply move it into the location that I want it to be in. And you'll see very often that I use these axis constraints when I move things around. The square in the middle allows you to move in the X and the Y at the same time. The Y allows you to move only in the Y, so even if I go all the way over here, I can't move in the X direction at all. And the same with the X. If I click on the X arrow, I can't move up and down at all. I can't move in the Y axis at all. Okay, so there's our third letter. Let's move on to the fourth, which is just going to be the same process of selecting the Create tab, going to the Text tool, and changing this to a D and dropping it in. Now, this is already set to 100 and Arial black, so the D is exactly what we wanted, but we might want to position it a little bit better. Let's say, for example, we want to align the D with the bottom of the 3. For this, we're going to start off by using something called the quad menu to access our snaps. So if we hold Shift on our keyboard and then right-click in our viewport, we get this specific quad menu, which in the bottom right-hand quad has the snap toggles that we have access to. By default, yours probably has grid points on and vertex off, so just click once to turn grid points off, and then Shift right-click again to bring up the quad menu, and then click vertex, and that'll turn vertex snaps on. So you should have this looking like I have it here, which is grid points turned off and vertex turned on. Now to turn snaps on, we need to look at this button up here called Snaps Toggle, and you can see right now that it's not blue, which means that it's not activated. So we could left click on this to turn it on, but the keyboard shortcut for that is S. So you can see and probably hear me pressing S on my keyboard to turn that on and off. Okay, really wanted to get you guys used to using keyboard shortcuts. Every time you have to move all the way up here to click a button and then all the way back down, that's just time lost. And if you have to do that multiple times to do something, it can really affect how much time it takes you to do things. Okay, so with your snaps on, we're going to once again left click on the Y axis so that we are constraining our movement to the Y axis. And then we're going to hover over the bottom of the 3 here and get that bottom vertex. And when I let go, you'll see that it's basically snapped this location to the bottom of the 3. So there we're using axis constraints and snaps together to move things into specific locations. So once again, we're holding Shift and right-clicking to get to our snaps toggles. We're pressing S to turn our snaps on and off. And then we're clicking on the Y-axis and hovering over the location that we want to move to. And then we see that we get the green vertex sign, which means we're good to go, and we let go. Okay, and that moves the D up to where we want it to. And now if I want to move it horizontally, I'll just click on the X, and so I'm not moving it up and down at all, right? But I'm able to then move the D over a little bit, and maybe I'll move the 3 over a little bit. And so you can see I'm able to create all of this text fairly simply, and it's gonna work out pretty well for us. Okay, so that wraps up the initial creation of our letters. Once again, to recap, we basically just used the Text tool, which is in the Create tab of our command panel, in the Shapes sub-tab here, and then we just used the Text tool, and we changed the font and the size to be what we want it to be, and then just entered the text inside of our text field, and then we just right-clicked in our scene to add letters. Once again, remember that we used constraints a lot to move things around, and that's just clicking on the different arrows that you have available to you. And also we learned to use snaps. The keyboard shortcut for that was S. And we also learned to change our snaps by holding Shift and right-clicking in our viewport to access the Snap Toggles quad menu.